Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Using Strategic Partnership for Value Creation from Early Stage Development to Manufacture. My name is Andrew Jernan and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved, so please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speaker throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and if you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using that chat panel. And at this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for future download. And at this point, I would like to thank ASICA who helped develop the content for this presentation. ASICA, part of Consort Medical Group, is renowned for developing and manufacturing both APIs and finished dose forms to the pharmaceutical industry. They're constantly developing the technical and analytical skills of their people to ensure that they're capable of meeting the ever-changing demands of their customers. Their state-of-the-art facilities enable delivery of full API development and manufacturing, formulation development, and finished dose manufacturing in a growing number of markets, allowing ASICA to manage their customers' supply chain effectively. Most importantly, they are aware that customers want more than a supplier, which is why they work in partnership to provide a flexible, efficient, and dependable service. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for today's event. Richard Fazakerly has over 27 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry, working in senior technical positions for Eisai, Eli Lilly, Roche, and Amersham International. With extensive experience in the development, optimization, and commercialization of pharmaceutical products, he's responsible for leading the technical function and heading up the formulation development service businesses within ASICA. And now, without further ado, I would like to hand the mic over to Richard. And Richard, you can begin your presentation when ready.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and hello, everybody. So, as Andrew said, I'm going to give a presentation today on strategic partnerships for value creation, and I would please encourage you all to answer or ask any questions to the moderator. So firstly, I guess what I'll do is I'll give you an overview of today's agenda. So I just want to give you a flavour for the company I work for, ASICA and Bestpac. I then really want to explore strategic partnerships, the why partner in the first place, advantages, pitfalls, and key success factors. And I also want to talk about value creation. What does it mean, and what are the implications for pharmaceutical development in particular? So obviously, just to give you a brief overview, so Consort Medical is basically a combination of ASICA and Bestpac. Basically provides our parent company with an enviable range of service in terms of not only be able to provide pharma companies with a reliable partner for drug development, but also device development in parallel, and obviously the supply chain management. So we have a strong reputation as a full-service contract development and manufacturing organisation, and I guess and our promise is to the market we help deliver and simplify customer supply chains, reducing the risk and getting products to the market faster. So really, I guess this slide gives you an overview of the flavour of what the company offers, and you can clearly see is that we're involved fundamentally from the API manufacture, drug formulation development, formulated product development, and in parallel with Bestpac, drug device or device development as well. Again, that's because we see a continuing trend of the bringing the two technologies together, and more people now are looking for the combination, and we offer that service from an early stage all the way through to commercial development. So really I want to talk about, I guess, the meat of today's presentation about pharmaceutical development. What are the challenges we face? I think this graphic here clearly represents the challenge that the whole industry still faces. Again, a lot of effort in drug discovery, tens of thousands of compounds, it says there. Honestly, a lot of time and effort, anywhere between 3 and 6 years, with a naturally high level of attrition. And then when we get into clinical trials, into man, the data available to us indicates that out of those tens of thousands of compounds, a very small number, single figures, will actually make it into clinical trials. Again, obviously, you go through the clinical development, phase 1, 2, and 3, and the information available tells us that over that 6 to 7 years, there's further attrition, and on average, about one FDA-approved medicine, so one product will come out at the end of that funnel, that will get through scale for manufacturing and move forward then into commercial supply. So the challenge is the industry, overall, with all the various different companies involved, still has a high challenge in developing and bringing new products to market with a high degree of failure or unsuccessful development. I guess the next slide probably brings us out in a little more detail with some more numbers and indicates the probability of attrition, but also the value and investment, and shows, I guess, gives some value around what that looks like and the challenge of the so-called valley of death. So the valley of death really is from preclinical leads, phase 1 and phase 2. We see a very high degree of attrition in products or programs, and then obviously a much tighter, getting through phase 3 to submission. So you can see there that very significant amounts of capital are being invested, and again, there's a high probability of attrition, in most development areas, in most areas of focus for companies developing new products. So obviously the industry is expanding all the time and focus on finding new ways to address these challenges, on how we get through the development phase, but also how do we share the risks and the rewards of success or failure. So moving on to the next slide really gives, I guess, another perspective on the same kind of life cycle from Bernard Associates. Obviously, there's a very heavy investment phase early on from the clinical phases, and then hopefully we get to launch, and then we go into the product life cycle itself. We hope to reap the rewards of that development through launch, growth, maturity, decline, and then obviously at the latter stages into generic competition. So hopefully one hopes that the commercial life cycle peak on the right hand side is much higher than the original development costs. But bearing in mind the attrition rate, and this gives some real challenges, is that really a very small number of candidates are going to make it through and reap the reward. And increasingly in today's markets where the payer is controlling the potential revenue sizes, that adds additional challenges to the rate of recovery. So moving on to the next slide, the reality of a life cycle for a product today is we have a very short commercial lifestyle. We spend anywhere between 10 and 15 years in development. Hopefully we get to market, but the information from the industry associations tells us that there's quite a short period of time before we get some brand competition, before other people enter the market, and then obviously there's generally a reasonable life cycle before generic entry. But increasingly these days, we see challenges all the time of people challenging patents, challenging technologies to enter into spaces, particularly for first-in-class drugs. So the reality is our development timelines are still quite long, if not increasing, based on increasing clinical trial requirements or trial size. And then obviously post-approval we have the opposite challenge, is that exclusivity period is being challenged and pressed by competitors to enter the space. So what does this look like when you move forward? So then we talk about value creation. So I'd like to gently move into the discussion of value creation. And obviously the prime value of any business is to create value for the customers and also for the stakeholders. And value, I think, in this industry is not just hard financial measures. So it's very easy to measure cash or any financial metric, but value is really defined by the customer. And there's many different aspects to value. there can be many different sources and drivers for what value means, and there can be changes throughout the product life cycle. So obviously, early in development, there will be different drivers, particularly when they say, obviously proving the concept and proving the capability or the suitability of the drug. Whereas in the late life cycle mode, where obviously now we've moved away from that to a more cost-based model, there will be a different set of drivers. So moving on to the next slide. So obviously value evolves throughout the market. And here, again, is a very simplistic graphic. This is obviously in the research end, obviously when we're doing clinical trials applications or we're doing clinical development strategies or executing clinical development. Value may be defined by more scientific drivers, by getting through the clinical trials and proving proof of concept and gathering evidence. Obviously then when we move away from research into a more of approval kind of process, we then start working through obviously meeting the requirements of the various regulatory bodies, and increasingly these days that is moving away from the FDA in the US and the European medicines and more into more national authorities. And how do we get those marketing authorizations? How do we get approvals? And then obviously we move into the commercialization phase, and obviously there you have the challenges that not only new clinical indications or areas want to develop, but obviously launch the product and increasingly have a rolling submission and launch program across the world. So we're moving now away from the big markets as we move into the BRIC countries or the smaller countries. More and more these days, launch is a process over several years rather than an event. And then obviously we're then into the whole life cycle management of the product, and one would hope a long time in the future, product withdrawal. So value through that life cycle, which can be over 15 years to get to approval and another 12 years to get to the end of a commercial life cycle for a loss of exclusivity in particular. But many products continue way beyond that. So there are some stalwart products still on the market today that have been around for decades. So what are value opportunities? What is value? So I mean, there's obviously many areas of value, and many of you listening today will have a different take on this. The value opportunities can be extensive in quality, it can be speed, flexibility, and agility. It might be a focus on information or data, particularly if you're in the early stages. Can we prove that? It can be around long-term competitiveness. How do we design the products to be successful in maybe a crowded marketplace, or for longer-term success in multiple indications. The value opportunities can be around accessing skills and capabilities that maybe neither party has. It can be around end-to-end supply chain management, where using a one-stop shop for end-to-end supply of not only the API, finished dose, but also the products. And then obviously we can talk about value creation, technology, innovative solutions. And again, there's always the drive for novel solutions to existing problems. IP creation, so obviously intellectual property, and building those patient-payer relationships, so supplying people and the payers with solutions to problems that they have. So really, I guess, is thinking about value, I kind of want to then move really to talk about what is a great strategic partnership. There's a lot of discussion in our industry about strategic partnerships and what that looks like. So a great strategic partnership is akin really to a long-term marriage. It creates kind of mutual value and benefit for all parties involved. So it might not be a simple two people involved, it might be multiple parties. It's a balanced long-term relationship. And what that means is when you look at the timelines for development and the commercial life cycle of a product, a balanced long-term relationship could be over decades. And sometimes in today's world, that kind of gets lost for a short-termist approach. There's a kind of a sharing of risk and reward. Obviously, as you saw earlier, there is some very large and potentially scary amounts of capital required to bring a product to market. And often it's how do we share the risks and how do we share the rewards. There's a lot to be said for alignment around a common purpose. So a great strategic partnership is around this commonality of vision, there's aligned goals and objectives. There's also the appropriate resources available. obviously financial is one aspect, but people and technology, where the partners are benefiting from each other in different ways. And there's this overarching thing about it's a long-term view over a short-term gain. So obviously a short-term view with the cycle times we're seeing for pharmaceutical developments really doesn't reflect the actual reality on the ground. And I guess there's a lot of research out there, and when I talk to people in the industry, there's a lot of desire for strategic partnerships, but there's a very high failure rate. So there's lots of people talking about strategic partnerships, but there is research out there that indicates in the order of 70% of them fail. And they fail for a variety of reasons, and we can explore some of those, I guess, how to avoid those pitfalls away. But I think the overarching thing I see is a true strategic partnership requires commitment and efforts by all parties involved. So this is not a passive kind of activity. This requires effort, this requires commitment, this requires a lot of communication and dedication to make it successful and beneficial. So moving to the next slide, why would you partner? And it's a question that people ask me. So obviously it potentially allows a company to focus on its core competencies. It maybe allows for increased efficiencies. It leverages resources, expertise, and capabilities. So obviously, as a CDMO, we see a lot of small companies, and we work with a lot of small companies who maybe don't have the resources, expertise, or capability to get themselves from the early stages of clinical development into the late stages of a commercial reality. So they need the ability to scale. They need access to capabilities they don't have. It obviously allows you to accelerate speed to market, and again, the advantage of that is speed is obviously important. So the quicker you can get to market successfully, then potentially the quicker you can reap the benefits or maintain your market opportunity. It allows you to scale investment. So obviously through the development, I guess the funnel that we shared earlier, there is a high probability of failure with new chemical entities. So obviously, if you're a smaller company, being able to scale your investments by partnering with somebody else is a good way to avoid a lot of capital commitment, that may not be realised later on. There's also potential, obviously, if you're partnering, to reduce internal oversight costs. So obviously, one of the things we'll talk about partnering is using the partner, to manage people on your behalf. So that can reduce the oversight cost on your company. There will clearly be cost-saving opportunities identified, potentially, obviously, in early stage development. The process may not be ideally suited for commercial, for full-scale commercial manufacturing. So there's maybe cost opportunities, and cost-saving opportunities can be identified at all stages. It allows agility and velocity. It potentially reduces complexity for partners trying to manage multiple parties when you can manage one. And invariably, in all the strategic relationships that I've been involved in, there's undoubtedly learning opportunities for both parties when you can get a different perspective, particularly when you're working outside an area that's not your core competency. So that understanding of development and or commercial can be insightful for parties. So I just want to talk next in finding the right partner. And how do you choose the right partner? Well, that's a very subjective discussion, but my personal advice would be you've got to invest time and effort in finding the right partner, and you're going to look at a whole variety of different aspects: cultural alignment, capability, geography, corporate culture, etc. And the reason you should spend a lot of time in there is obviously if you're going to commit to a long-term relationship, you really want to make sure that you're committing to the right partner earlier. So rather than kind of choose in haste and regret at leisure, you want to spend some time exploring how it could work and it would work. And you've got to find someone you can work with on a basis of commitment, trust and collaboration. So one of the differences we'll talk about later is a strategic partnership is really a much more collaborative relationship than the so-called transactional relationship. So it's really focusing on the relationship and how you sustain that, not just around the outcomes and deliverables, but how to build a relationship that can stand the realities of pharmaceutical development and life cycle management. Products will fail, projects will maybe not meet the expectation. So the relationship looks to transcend that to a degree and work on that. And I guess my experience and the experience of other people I've talked to is, if you're going to base a relationship surely on the enforcement of contractual agreements, that is, in the longer term, just won't be successful. Because obviously the creation of value and some of the more, I guess, qualitative value creation just really doesn't thrive in the environment where it's a very contractual, focused on delivery of X by Y. So one of the common pitfalls in the research and from my experience, so there's a lot of focus on tactical, not strategic aspects. So there's a short-term kind of focusing of a relationship and not really looking at the longer-term strategic aspects. So it kind of reverts into what do we need to do in the short term. There's a lot of time, there's underestimating of the level of effort required to build and maintain a relationship. This isn't the occasional teleconference once in a while. Building an effective relationship requires a lot of integration, a lot of discussion at all levels of the company. So it requires a lot of relationship work that can involve an element of obviously teleconference and meetings, but it's around developing the understanding. There's a lot of challenge in today's environment around impatience. Basically, you've entered into this relationship you're working for, but it's just not happening quick enough, and it's based on limited data. Well, it's not happening quick enough. We need to do something different. If you look at the overall timelines for development and life cycle management, sometimes just being patient, is one area that you should think about. There's clearly a lot of effort around not anticipating the potential threats and potential mitigation. So it's kind of the rose-tinted glasses view of the world. Sometimes sitting there thinking, well, what would we do in the event of this relationship when a project does fail? And thinking about that and exploring that and developing the understanding. Sometimes not allowing an appropriate level of autonomy. So again, in my experience, there can be a tendency where you've partnered with a party to provide a service over the longer term, and basically there's this desire to ensure that there's people in plant or on site all the time looking after your interests. So that kind of creates or is counterproductive. Sometimes a lack of transparency can be an issue, and that can be information either not shared in a timely manner, or information is not visible, or changes aren't visible, and sometimes just an unwillingness to collaborate between the parties. So although the relationship is theoretically strategic and is theoretically longer term, there's just a lack of desire to make it succeed. So they can be the kind of common pitfalls, and that's not an all-inclusive list. There are no doubt many more that we could add, but they're kind of key ones that flag on my kind of radar. So what are the key success factors? So in the next couple of slides, really, I just want to explore these, but really the key success factors are strong governance. There is a good, strong governance. Some good measures of value and success. There's some openness, transparency, honesty and responsiveness, so there's that visibility. You built mutual trust and confidence. Both parties trust the other to deliver. There's confidence that what is promised will be delivered. Again, you're achieving mutual goals to bring mutual benefits. So there's a balanced relationship. It's not unbalanced in favour of one party or the other party. And obviously, there's the opportunity to give extra value and find ways to do ongoing innovation. So at the bottom, we've kind of summarised this in 7 kind of key factors. What I'd like to do in the next couple of slides is explore those in a bit more detail and provide some, what I think are good examples. So strong governance, and again, really this is one of the key ones, and that's why I put it first. There's a clear governance model in place. Everyone knows who needs to talk to who's got the authority, who's got the power. There's clear goals and objectives aligned to the business. Again, that always helps to write these down. It's clear to everybody. Everyone has a mutually agreed definition of what success looks like, or maybe what failure looks like. Everyone knows what their roles, responsibilities and accountabilities are, so that we don't have the situation with, particularly across cultural barriers, understanding who's doing what or who thinks who's doing what. there's good, robust, frequent communication. That's the formal communication, and there's the informal stuff as well. So this is where, you know, taking the time and the effort for people to visit sites, to be there in person, you know, to not only have the formal meetings but also discuss the informal aspects and build that relationship. Regular meetings is clearly key, not meetings for meeting's sake, but obviously having a meeting or you know, the opportunity to discuss and flag stuff, and sharing the appropriate management information in a timely manner so people can see that, can react. So that would be my take on what strong governance should cover. Truly, in measuring value and success, I mean, obviously between the two parties, it's kind of, we have some clear key performance indicators. They're relevant to whatever we're doing. You know, it's not a KPI dashboard of thousands of data points, but it allows us to look forward, not backwards. It measures in real time and gives us some idea of tracking and trending. Are we on target? If we're not on target, you know, do we know why? It ideally should measure both soft and hard aspects of value, so not only just the financial efforts, but you know, are we meeting the goals in the appropriate manner? You know, is there a level of comfort, etc. Again, it looks forwards, not just backwards. So you know, it's kind of not lead. You know, there's lead and lag indicators in there, and there's not this obsession with looking backwards. You know, we are looking forward, say, well, we know what's happened. How do we move forward? Again, I think from one of my personal experiences, every so often there's what I would call a periodic business review meeting. That's kind of some kind of check on the health of the relationship, but also saying, you know, has there been any fundamentals since we started the relationship? Has anything significant changed? Again, that can be a whole variety of different things. And what does that mean for this relationship? You know, change will happen; it's inevitable. But at least we can see that and discuss that. And again, there's got to be this process about communicating the value and the success, so people understand, you know, is it adding value to both parties? What is that value? How's it understood? And we're communicating success, you know, not just failure. So occasionally that's, you know, looking at and saying, well, what's going well, and building on that. I guess the next point for me is about mutual trust and confidence. It's around obviously setting expectations. Again, we've talked about frequent face-to-face meetings. There's also discussion about articulating the pain on both sides. So obviously flexibility and you know, is a key aspect, but that can create pain. You know, in a commercial organisations, obviously servicing many customers, you know, a late stage change to any particular aspect can cause some pain. It's about understanding and articulating what that change means. It's about demonstrating some form of mutual dependence, so people recognise that both parties understand, you know, that there is a dependence, that, you know, success is for both parties. It really is about, you know, being supportive, encouraging, respectful of each other. You know, as I mentioned earlier, is letting whoever the suppliers get on with their job. So sometimes trying to avoid a high degree of micromanagement or interference. If you've partnered with the right partner, you know, you've done so to allow them to do what they're good at, and vice versa. So give them the space, you know, to achieve what they need to do, but obviously build the trust and express the trust. And be transparent and honest. So obviously that's around recognising that when things are going well, we discuss it. But when things are not going well, again, there's that visibility and transparency to say that there are problems and sharing that. And I really want to pick up on that own honest and transparency, because again, that's a key, particularly with, you know, large or long-term relationships. You know, it is building that trust and confidence. It's about timely sharing of information. You know, so then again, people have the visibility, everyone can articulate where the relationship is. There's a clear escalation process for when, you know, things do go wrong. You know, how are we going to resolve that? And we thought about that, and we know how to do that. There's clearly no surprises. You know, again, if things are changing for whatever reason on any party side, you know, people know that there's clear communication in advance. You know, there's timely communication, so whatever impacts there are can be dealt with. There's an element of obviously understanding the value, but also the pain. So, you know, value is one thing, but also understanding the impact of if things aren't going to go the right way, or there's some unexpected change. How do we deal with that? It's about taking the time, in my opinion, to build the trust in relationships and obviously understand, you know, all the partners' businesses, understanding what's important and understanding, that how the actions of one party can impact and affect the other party, and being able to articulate that, at all levels is highly beneficial. And it must be a two-way process, or three-way, or however many parties involved, so people can understand that, an impact or a delay or an opportunity on one partner's side may cascade and impact the others, but everyone's aligned and involved, so that can be addressed in the most appropriate manner. I guess the next one is, obviously, with any partnership, it's about delivery on what you promised. Again, obviously, the first thing is to ensure, do we all agree on what's been promised? Is that clearly articulated? Are the regular checks and balances in place? So can we track and monitor? Do we understand where we are? Again, is with any supply chain aspect, throughout clinical development, commercial supply, is, do we understand, where we are? Do we understand, are we on time? Are there any impacts? Are there any delays? Is there any acceleration? Are there any changes to forecasts or demands that we need to address? We have some, we understand and agree the priorities, and again, that can make sure there's alignment between parties. The agreed timescales are achievable. So again, with any timescale within development in particular, there's always a pressure, to go faster, to go quicker. But that's got to be balanced on is, what is realistically achievable, to achieve the goal. Again, there's a whole discussion around, visibility, communicating dependencies. If delivery is successful, that there may be constraints, there may, one party downstream might not be able to deliver on any aspect of a contract or of a project if the guys upstream haven't delivered or are delayed. So it's understanding that things need to happen in a certain way, and is that clearly understood? And as part of that is identifying and removing barriers. So quite often, in my experience, the way to do some of this and make this happen very well is to get all the parties in a room together in person and discuss, how do we deliver, is there a common plan, does everyone understand the plan, does everyone understand their dependencies, and what are the barriers or what are the potential intercompany barriers we need to remove to make that happen. So I'm now going to pick up on the next one, which is mutual goals and mutual benefits. So obviously joint strategic planning, so if there is a true strategic relationship and if we're going to work together to bring a product from early stage development all the way through to commercial reality, then obviously there needs to be some longer term strategic planning aspects to the relationship, and that might be building capability or expanding capability to meet the goals, and quite often if you want to add significant capital investment into an operation, there's quite a long lead time to make that happen. So obviously the earlier there's visibility and the earlier we can have discussions about what likely volumes and other things are, the better, because it can help everyone from a smooth, seamless, pain-free transition. And that's obviously the opportunity around what are the mutual beneficial, exploring what mutually beneficial opportunities there are. This belief in mutual success, basically using each partner as a trusted advisor. So obviously, from my experience working in CDMO, particularly with our manufacturing colleagues, it's sometimes, particularly with those development businesses, is really, helping them understand and using the manufacturing colleagues to advise them and so learn on what could be the most effective, efficient way to develop and bring their product forward, technologies or processes. So it's balancing, and leveraging that knowledge. Obviously ensuring the mutual respect, and it's about maintaining this clear commitment, investment and ownership from both sides. So it's demonstrated to everybody in both organisations, or however many organisations involved, that there's a clear commitment from the top to make this work. I guess the last point I want to talk about really is continuous improvement. So clearly in any strategic relationship there's an opportunity to identify continuous improvement opportunities. Obviously through early stage development and commercial delivery, there's always those opportunities to find ways to improve the process, and it gives you the opportunity to explore connections between knowledge and expertise and both parties' needs. So again, an example here is someone who spent a long time developing a manufacturing process or a synthetic route, can really help the guys downstream in the commercial delivery end, because they've obviously got a lot of knowledge and expertise, from the very early days of the process. So that can be leveraged to the benefit of both parties. Conversely, from the more manufacturing end of the supply chain, they can quite often identify ideas that maybe during development weren't considered because the focus then was very different, and it might create value in a different way. So to realise continuous improvement opportunities, it's about having the right people and the right process in place to act on, to identify and act on ideas, and really to identify and record those ideas. So again, over the long life cycle of a development or relationship, there are opportunities when the same idea, is thought up by new individuals. It's about tracking those ideas and making sure they're captured, but also making sure they're acted upon. And I guess also it's about creating that culture supportive of innovation. So what you're saying there is rather than stick with an existing process or existing technology, sometimes having in a strategic relationship the ability to look for new and novel ways to solve solutions or solve problems and bring new solutions. New technologies emerging all the time, new needs are emerging all the time. So it's about creating that culture that's supportive of that, sometimes is willing to look beyond today's reality and look forward to tomorrow's. So I guess in summary, and I'll look forward from the questions from the audience, there's going to be a lot of value creation. Again, that's ever evolving through the life cycle. There's a lot of tangible and intangible aspects to that, and again, it's very difficult to be prescriptive around that throughout there. I guess in terms of strategic partnerships, it's a key trend for the industry in all sectors. You hear more and more about it. Some of this is not just relationship, but there's co-location of operations. It is highly beneficial to all parties involved, and I guess when you've been in a successful strategic relationship, it's kind of like there's a realization that this can be a very effective way to operate. But it does require patience, commitment, effort on all parties to be successful. So there is no overnight solution to that. It is a long process on occasions, but the value in the longer term clearly outweighs the investment. So there are some references there, and I guess I'll hand it over to the moderator for any questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Richard. Before we head off into the Q&A period, we actually have two back-to-back poll questions for the audience, and the first of which is appearing on your screen right now. And you can vote on this in real time by clicking on your screen. And I encourage you to do so right now. The question that we have for you in the audience: in your experience, which is the most important aspect for a great strategic partnership? Is that create mutual value and benefit for all parties? Second option there, balance long-term relationship. Third option, share risk and reward. Your fourth option there, common purpose, align vision, goals, and objectives. And your fifth and final option for this first of two poll questions, long-term view over short-term gain. All right, looks like most of you have voted on this question, so let's take a look at the results here. The most popular answer, 44% of you said common purpose, align vision, goals, and objectives. Second most popular answer was create mutual value and benefit for all parties. And 11% of you said long-term view over short-term gain. All right, let's head off into the second polling question of the day. This time, you can vote on more than one answer if you'd like. There are checkboxes available there beside each option for you to click on. So this time the question is, to make a strategic partnership successful, which do you think is key to achieving this? And all your options there are strong governance and communication, openness, transparency, honest and responsiveness, delivering what you promise, achieving mutual goals to bring mutual benefit, and your fifth and final option there, delivering extra value and ongoing innovation. Question again, to make a strategic partnership successful, which do you think is key to achieving this? Looks like most of you have voted on this question, so I'm going to close polling now and share the results with everyone. The most popular answers were openness, transparency, honest and responsiveness, and delivering what you promise. And the second most popular answer was achieving mutual goals to bring mutual benefit, followed by strong governance and communication, and finally delivering extra value and an ongoing innovation. All right, well now let's move into the Q&A, Richard, and at this point I'd like to invite our audience to continue sending their questions and comments, and right now using that questions window for this, which is the Q&A portion of the webinar, of course. And Richard, I've already received some questions here, so let's get started with the ones that we have. Our first question here, how do you set up a strategic partnership in the best possible way? Can you give us some examples?
So, I mean, thank you, Andrew. So I think the key thing is again, firstly, I think it's identifying do you want to be in a strategic partnership? You know, there's clearly a longer-term commitment there, and you've got to be open and honest with yourself and say, you know, do you like the idea of it, or are you willing to commit to the reality? I think then, as I indicated in the slide deck, it's around if you're clearly committed to having a strategic partnership, it's about finding the right partner, and again, putting the time and effort into identifying the right partner that your company wants to be in that relationship with. And then when you've identified the right partner to be successful is you know, talking through all the things I identified there, is around putting the right governance in place, spending the time in the early days of the relationship building the right foundations, and again, just validating with yourself, is this really what you want to do? And then when you have decided that's what you want to do, maintaining the effort and not being impatient. But I guess within that also, just keep checking that, you know, there's still alignment, still direction all the way through.
Great. All right. Thank you for that. Another question here. How do smaller companies leverage strategic partnerships with larger companies? Your thoughts there?
So I think that's a great one. So you know, quite a lot of the clients I work with on a day-to-day basis are quite small operations, and there's clearly anxiety there that, you know, a small operation of less than, I don't know, 30 people or even smaller, working with a much larger company like ASICA, you know, which has got, you know, thousands of people, and how do they don't get lost in the system? Again, I think there's clearly an opportunity for smaller companies. I mean, obviously it allows you to leverage our capabilities and expertise, and the model of working with smaller companies is increasingly the norm within the CDMO space. So working with the smaller companies around, again, going through the same processes, but I think for the smaller companies is recognizing there's a lot to be gained working with a large company, but making sure that they feel they've got the right governance in place, you know, making sure they feel that they've got the right visibility and presence, and they don't feel they're getting, I guess, you know, lost in the background noise against other bigger players. So really it's about, you know, small companies, you know, for many small companies, working with, I guess, you know, strategic partners, particularly when they've got a larger portfolio of products, is probably the most sensible way forward. And it manages not only the capabilities and size, but also, you know, manages the risk as well, you know, in terms of the likely success or otherwise of their portfolio.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you for that. If you do have any questions for Richard, don't forget to type them into the chat box there. Our next question here, can you give some examples of value-added activities for us?
Yeah, surely. So I mean, I'll give you some examples. So I guess value-add is obviously, you know, being in a CDMO organization, we can add our expertise to clients' projects where you turn around and say, reflect back on the realities of their ideas around the kind of product or presentation they're going to bring to the market, where they have some ideas around that, is working with them to optimize that. It's about working with clients, you know, particularly and providing, you know, I guess those things that they never thought they would need. So particularly where regulatory submissions or processes are involved, obviously we've got a lot of experience. And so we can leverage that and ask some questions and sometimes be that critical friend that our clients need, and say, well, you know, what do you want to do about a particular aspect? And then we can provide some options from our experience on potential solutions. So I mean, there are examples of value. There could be many other aspects of value. I mean, obviously not in the I guess the more supply chain orientated, you know, where smaller clients will maybe not to be able to leverage, I guess, their purchasing power. Obviously, working with a company like ours allows them to potentially access, financial benefits through our leveraging with suppliers. So there's all sorts of different levels of value within that. Some obviously hard financial, but many more are much more, shall we say, difficult to quantify.
All right, thanks for that, Richard. Another question here. Can risk be shared in a strategic partnership? And if so, how?
So I mean, that's a great one. So clearly within pharma development, there's an awful lot of risk. Early stage projects, there is clearly a lot of risk, and if you believe the statistics, and I generally take those as fairly given, that in the early stages there's a high degree of chance of a project will not meet its objectives. So I think more and more these days, there is this risk sharing arrangement. And it can be sharing not just on a capital basis; it can be sharing on an expertise and capacity basis as well. So I think there is a lot of risk sharing. So I mean, the kind of things you see is not only around capital investment sharing, the risk and burden around potential capital investment, but there's also joint sharing of development as well, and the costs associated with that. And this is where I think you've got to identify and express and understand the mutual benefit. If one client is bringing a new product to market and they are looking for manufacturing capacity or capability, then the other partner who provides that has a vested interest in sharing that risk, because obviously that's a future client and potentially they'll be the beneficiary. So it's about balancing the two elements there.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that. Moving on to another question here. This audience member writes, do you think the DS plus DP integrated partnership presents any real added value?
I think that's a very good question. So drug substance and drug product. So obviously being able to provide the drug substance, and traditionally we've had very disjointed supply chains where essentially the drug substance end of the industry is traditionally more chemically focused and has not really been fully integrated with the drug product. We believe there's a lot of advantage in that. So obviously, we operate in that fully integrated model, and it does allow you, on simplistically on a technical level, there's a simplified supply chain. It's potentially all under one umbrella, so that makes life easier in many different respects. You're removing those intercompany barriers. It also allows you, particularly when working, with the drug substance and the drug product divisions, to share expertise. So, when there are issues or problems or opportunities on either side of that relationship, then there can be opportunities to share expertise or knowledge. So, I mean, we have had instances with client projects where one of the advantages are, we can believe we've had a drug product problem. It's become apparent that obviously it's an issue with drug substance, but we've been able to tap into the internal expertise to resolve that issue, or at least access expertise to help that. So I think there's a lot of advantage to having that full integration. It kind of connects the full values and supply chain, and it adds a lot of this, should we say, qualitative value that can be very useful indeed in today's environment.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that, Richard. We have reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. If you do have any further questions for Richard, though, you can email him via the email address showing on your screen right now. That's richard.fazackerly@asica-pharma.com. And thank you, everyone, for participating in today's conference. You'll be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event, and a survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated, as it will help us improve our further webinars. Now, please join us in thanking our speaker for today, Richard Fazackerly. We hope that you found this conference informative. Have a great day, everyone.